So finally, we come to sailor's life in port. So this could be foreign or distant places, and also home ports. And even when they were on shore, their manner of dress, their style, their actions were very distinctive to sailors, so they could be picked out. So coming ashore meant, of course, the places where they spent their time. These would be the bars, the brothels, and perhaps the Bethels. So only the first two are the ones where they spent their money. So depending on where they went, which ports they came into, there would be different things that they might be drawn to doing. Beyond the bars and brothels, they actually did go on tours to look at what was there. So Samuel Williams in the 1870s was a sailor from Portsmouth. He described his visit to Key West in Florida, and a visit that he took to a cigar factory. So here he was impressed that the 500 workers making these famous Cuban cigars, they had actually hired someone to read to them in Spanish, of course, because that was what they spoke. And he also points out the gathering of warships that were there in the harbor. This is, of course, just pre-Spanish-American War. And because of the scarcity of crew available for their ship, it took them a long time to get enough people, enough sailors to actually leave again. And as they were sailing out of the harbor, a small boat stopped them from the Navy looking for deserters aboard. Of course, many miles later out at sea, the deserters appeared on deck to help them sail the rest of the way home. Another of the American ports far distant was Honolulu, and there was definitely more laws there with the number of missionaries who were attempting to protect the interests of the native Hawaiians. And so there were many things that a sailor could get into trouble with. A list of things that could get them into prison: drunkenness, adultery and fornication, assault and battery, larceny, and furious riding. I have no idea what that is. And of course, breaking the Sabbath. This would usually only get them a 24-hour stay in the prison before the captain would come and bail them out. Because there was so few crew, at least it seemed that they wouldn't be in there for long. So in Portsmouth, especially the area along the riverfront, provided some of these backwater areas for poorer folk as the upper class left that area. What's now the most expensive place to live in Portsmouth. So for many years, Portsmouth had survived basically due to its vices. So since about the 1700s, they boasted public houses or bars for drinking ale, and at times there's more than 15 pubs. Information and women, of course, were passed from hand to hand. Frank Jones was one of the largest brewers in the world, and he called Portsmouth home in the 1800s. So by 1882, he was like the largest beer producer with like 150,000 barrels a day. So it was a pretty sure bet that if you were drinking in the bars downtown, you would be drinking his beer. And of course, where there are bars, there are whorehouses. The red light district at some points housed about 11 places of ill repute, and during the 1800s, the ladies of the night would have been dressed and put on parade throughout the town in the day so that everyone could get a good look at what was being offered that evening. There was lots of money to be made, and none of the madams, whether they were male or female, seemed to have any qualms about how they made it. So this, the oldest profession in the world, thrived in the seaport for more than 40 years before it really imploded due to crime and vice that was drawn to that area. So because the places where the sailors were hanging out were of such ill repute, either the bars or the brothels, there was definitely the chance that they would be shanghaied. So what does it mean to be shanghaied? It could also be called press gang, but that usually referred more to naval ships. So this action, these are both verbs, is basically a group who's hired as thugs, takes men against their will to be sailors on the ship. Of course, it was far easier if they got that particular sailor drunk and they woke up, whether they were a good sailor or not, and they woke up far out at sea when there was no way that they could easily return to shore. The only safe haven, places where you could not possibly be shanghaied, were sailors' homes. So the first of these began in Boston, started by Sarah Josepha Hale. This is the same woman who wrote Mary Had a Little Lamb and pushed for a federal holiday for Thanksgiving. And here it was based, religious based, and so sailors were expected to adhere to the Sabbath and say their prayers, etc. So for most sailors, this was sort of a last resort. They would far rather take an advance on their pay and spend that out and end up on the next ship leaving port. So in conclusion for this lecture, just looking at how sailors lived from day to day, they really had harsh working lives in the past. Bad food, bad pay, bad health, all of these things concentrated in a small space with a lot of sailors stuck together in these confined quarters. Of course, it could be good if you got along with the people who were there, if the work wasn't too harsh, if the officers weren't too brutal. And then, once in port, again, it could be dangerous for the sailors if they managed to get themselves in the wrong situation and were out at sea again, having all their money gone before they knew it. All right, on to lecture 2.